I loved Amanchu from episode 1, and I still do very much. However, there's one thing that has managed to break the relaxed, pleasant trance the series would otherwise have me bound by, and that is the character Ninomiya Ai. Now, Ai-chan herself isn't the problem. She's generally fun, and episode 8 developed her to give her some more depth. But it is with that added depth that I really saw what made my issue with her so troublesome. She is yet another example of an anime male basher. Now, I won't get into the politics and debate surrounding this trope, as while it's certainly worth having, it isn't relevant to my topic. But its general prevalence within anime is a large part of what makes it so distracting in Amanchu. Amanchu is a series that stands out a good deal from a lot of anime. Its characters feel more like people, not being defined by singular gimmicky character traits, and not coming off as if they had been written to be a specific archetype and then had anything beyond that archetype added in as an afterthought to make them stand out in some small way. Sure, Pikuri is extremely energetic, even eccentric, but she is a multifaceted person. She experiences different moods, so we see her getting introspective at moments, thinking about herself and her relationship with those around her, which serves to prevent that goofiness from defining her as virtually her entire personality. Amanchu has a lot of the tonal elements of other Iyashikei series, the slow pace, pleasant characters, and beautiful atmospheric music, but comparing Amanchu to its closest recent peer in this regard, Flying Witch, I don't find any major character tropes that they share. Nothing like the childhood friend, One-sama, or heaven forbid, tsundere that come up time and again in new series every season. It also has some similarities to this director's other works, especially the series that was based off of a manga by the same author. But this ends up highlighting some of Amanchu's strengths. The derp faces from Aria that return in this show are unique to each character, and clue us into their individual personalities. Even its typical elements are usually tailored to the specifics of the series, and so end up enhancing it. Tropes are so common because they are effective to some degree, so they can be useful if used properly. Amanchu doesn't feel like a typical anime for whatever that term is worth, but Ai's constant physical abuse towards her brother is nearly as typical as you can possibly get, so it really feels jarring whenever it occurs, generally prompting the question, why? Breaking my immersion is a grievous enough offense, but it is the series' failure to have a justification that answers that question upon analysis of it that is truly damning. Makoto seems to be very fearful of her rage, but while she does seem royally pissed in that one instance of it we see, it is only that one instance of her anger that we see, and she does not reserve her violence towards him for that occasion. We learn that she is a bit reserved with her feelings and hides them to avoid embarrassment in episode 8, so maybe hitting him is like a tsundere thing? But that doesn't really make sense because at her most vulnerable moment where she's really opening up, she doesn't hit him. And while we could see that as her letting down her guard in some way, the tsundere theory is further undermined by the fact that she kicks him around in plenty of instances where it just doesn't seem remotely likely that she's having some embarrassing emotional reaction that she's trying to mask. Because it is vulnerability that she is a bit insecure about, not the whole spectrum of emotion like joy and friendship. The best I can come up with is that this is some form of sibling teasing, but that explanation feels incredibly weak to me, as someone who has 3 siblings myself. For starters, it is incredibly one-sided. We get nary a hint of return fire from Makoto, be it verbal or physical, and he is also legitimately afraid of the violence to a degree that makes it tough to buy into as just light-hearted teasing. What emerges as by far the most reasonable conclusion as to why she behaves like this is that she beats up her brother because girls in anime shows beat up hapless guys, and that's disappointing. The idea that something is happening just because in this medium that thing happens, instead of happening as any kind of logical result of the setting or the characters' personalities or the events that occur, is really harmful to any piece of media that adopts this approach mindlessly, and can be harmful to significant portions of a medium if this approach becomes prevalent, leading to stale characters and settings that feel like they are far less concerned with being internally consistent than with maintaining consistency with the tropes of their peers. Something like the Asterisk War provides an example of what happens when a work is conceived as a result of that approach and nothing else outside of it whatsoever, not daring to take the risk of introducing one new idea or one take on a trope that would differentiate it from the norm. I think Amanchu makes a great companion piece in that regard, because it contains this one instance of blindly slotting a trope into your series where otherwise it eschews those cliches in favor of creating a distinctive presentation and cast of characters. It shows us, in isolation, the harm this practice can have, and how much better those elements of a series that aren't a result of it end up being. A Manchu also utilizes some tropes without that mindlessness that I mentioned being an issue earlier, and proves that it can be done right. If you've seen a Manchu before watching this video, which you should have because I already gave it this glowing recommendation, a scene from the first episode that contains cartoony anime violence not perpetrated by Ai may have come to mind. This scene does a couple of key things that explain this violence in-world in my eyes. For one, it uses the derp faces, so as much as I praised these characters' humanity earlier, we know that this is a more surreal moment. It also helps that Pikuri pretty much deserves her smack for getting up and just blowing into her whistle like an idiot instead of giving her introduction. We see a little later that Katori-sensei is a bit of a romantic, with her speech telling students they should focus on athletics over their studies, or even just goofing off and having fun with friends if that's what they want in life. So seeing the fact that she still won't take nonsense from them helps to make her a bit more believable as an actual teacher, and generally lets us know that although her personality is fairly laid back, she still has standards for her students. Pikuri's reaction shows neither significant pain nor any kind of anger at the fact that her teacher did that, so unlike Ai's violence, this also feels more like a light smack upside the head than something doing actual damage. The violence in this scene feels more logical from a character perspective, serves to inform us about those characters, and the surreality with which it is presented makes it feel more lighthearted and abstract, making it much less jarring. A Manchu also plays with tropes in smaller ways, like doing that visual effect where the ellipses appear behind a character's head to convey a kind of speechless reaction, a visible silence. In a Manchu, this ellipsis trails upwards unevenly, reading them right to left, which represents Pikuri's concern for Teko. And because a lift in pitch usually denotes a question, it also conveys a sense of, what is this girl doing? The stylized sweat drops that show up in this scene and others throughout the episode are an inclusion of a trope that feels very fitting, due in decent part to the fact that they are adapted to fit the series, bright, cheerful, and occasionally pretty goofy looking. So as we can see, series built upon tropes suffer for it, and a good show can be hurt when it puts no thought into their inclusion, but they can be advantageous if used correctly. The ubiquity of many of the tropes in anime makes them into a sort of common language that a series can really benefit from drawing upon to converse with its audience if the thought process behind their inclusion is more along the lines of, this will convey what I'm trying to communicate very well, and not simply, I will make a tsundere, or, this is what an anime does, right? Basically, creators should use a trope when the trope makes their point, instead of making their point the use of that trope. They should stop being lazy.